What is
Almost.
that? Oh, okay.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, I'm Janelle Pizarro.
I'm Frederick Philip von Weiss, and thank you for consuming the Thunder Nerds, a conversation with the people behind the technology
That love what they do and do tech good.
Doing tech. Hey, I don't know if you know who this guy is, but we got Brad Frost on the show, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, spending a little bit of time with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are you enjoying the festivities so far?
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I brought my family along, so it's my 7-month-old's first web design conference.
Well, it's never too early to start. So are they more like a React kind of person, or?
I think they're on this new one that just got released yesterday, and then she's ahead of the curve. So,
oh, okay. What's it called? Paw Patrol, I think.
Yeah. It's totally reactive. It's very good. It's a very good library. So.
Yeah, I like that guy Marshall, but I'm not sure. Chase is pretty cool. I like his police car, but I mean Marshall's fire truck. That's where it's at.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're adorable. I can't.
On roll, Paw Patrol. Oh, yeah, it's a good show. I can't get enough of it.
You're just like crystal balling into my future. So.
Oh man,
I got nieces, so I know all about it. It's just I don't have the lived experience yet. So
yeah, and you know what's the fun part is that you start to actually enjoy these shows too, and you have conversation with your other dad friends about it, and you're like, ooh, oh man,
like full on conversations.
Oh
about,
yeah,
like, Paw Patrol.
Oh yes, I'm not joking.
Yeah.
What?
Like,
okay, pause. We need to pause this real quick.
Pause.
Let's
like Paw
talk
Patrol.
about these conversations.
No, nobody needs to know about this unless you have children. We'll spare you, because it's quite interesting.
Well, Brad, hey, hi.
Hi.
First and foremost.
Hello.
So tell me a little bit about what you do. Like, what's your day-to-day like?
That's a really tough question. That's like the pie chart of my day-to-day is like, it couldn't be more different. So, I'm a web designer. I call myself I guess like a front-end designer by trade. So I write like HTML and CSS and presentational JavaScript. So still do my fair share of that. I do a bunch of consulting with a bunch of organizations of various shapes and sizes. So oftentimes I'm not like writing code and stuff for them, but rather like sort of guiding their teams and like helping designers and developers work better together and create design systems and all that stuff. And then like I'll do a bunch of workshops and travel around to other events and conferences like Event Apart and stuff. And then, of course, small business owner, a bunch of admin and other stuff. And it's just there's no sense of schedule whatsoever.
It sounds like you have a lot of free time and you're not very busy.
Yeah. So,
that's what I'm getting.
Yeah, throw an infant on the mix, and
oh my gosh, yeah,
And
that's
you have
great.
all the free time in the world.
It's great, yeah.
It's amazing how much your time just with the kid, yeah.
You know what? But I will say it's been incredibly helpful to just have this new anchor to. It's like here's what my priority is.
Aww.
It's like
absolutely.
it's like. Sure, side projects, sure, blog posts, sure, whatever open source projects and stuff. It's like, okay, like it's just reset button on all of that stuff. So I'm happy about that,
Aww.
Yeah, it really is. It's nice to have that, like that. That's where my life is, and I do some other things.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes my soul smile.
Yeah, kids are wonderful.
Yeah. But it is the truth. It's like, I'm not just saying that. It's like, oh, okay, like here's what I need to get done so that I can go back to the thing that really matters. And that's cool. That's cool. So
what have you been doing a lot lately though? What's been mostly consuming your time? Is it more traveling, doing these kind of conferences?
It's just no semblance. It's like, sure, maybe. I don't. It's like sometimes I'm like on the road every week. Other times, like having like paternity leave and sort of like trying to dial it back a little bit has like had me doing more stuff at home. And I'll do like remote consulting and sort of like sessions with different companies and stuff like that as a way of like not getting on an airplane and going away from my family. So it's like But it really depends. It's just like, sort of go where the wind takes me a little bit. And yeah, like I'll say like the one sort of underlying sort of theme with everything has been design systems, like in a big way, as far as like what the subject matter is. And it's like floating around, on airplanes or whatever, just like writing about it or consulting about it or doing production work, and all of that is like all about like that topic. It's exploded, and it's been a fun wave to ride for sure.
Yeah.
And design systems, that was what your talk was about today, right? So tell me and our listeners what a design system is. I mean, maybe some people haven't heard of it, don't use it in their
and if you don't mind me interjecting, the title is Maintaining Design Systems. So I think there's a good takeaway there.
Yeah. So the official definition is hard to lock down. And if you ask, 100 different people, you're going to get 100 different answers, sort of. And that makes things a little difficult, because it's a little bit of like the blind man and the elephant sort of parable, where it's like blind men approach an elephant, and it's like, the person touching the leg is like, oh, an elephant is like a tree, like a tree trunk. And the person touching the ears is like, oh, it's like a fan. And so it's like designers will like see a design system as like, oh, it's this, set of like, it's a visual language and stuff. And then developers will be like, oh, it's a set of like reusable like React components. And then like product owners will be like, oh, this is like this other thing. So it's hard to sort of pin down exactly what it is. It's sort of like an umbrella term. And I sort of tend to define a design system as the sort of official story of how your organization designs and builds digital products. So, and what I mean by that is it's like you're putting this thing together to basically say like, here's how we do digital stuff at X company, whatever it is. And there's a bunch of ingredients and a bunch of components to that story. So yeah, it might be like Sketch library, it might be that React library, it might be the style guide website that houses all of the documentation and bundles everything up. Voice and tone guidelines, like everything else, like whatever your organization needs to sort of produce or sort of like, collect and put under one roof in order to sort of tell a coherent, cohesive story about like, here's how we do things. And I like to put it through the lens of like a new hire, right? So it's like you hire a new designer, you hire a new developer. If they're worth their salt, they're going to sort of say, like, well, how do we do things here? You know what I mean? And it's like, with the design system, you can answer that question with a link, right? With here's a URL to our style guide, right? Which houses all of our design systems ingredients. So you can understand how we think about accessibility, or how we think about performance, and what our code standards are, what our design standards are, and stuff like that. And like that I think sort of paints the picture of, it's like, that's what these things are for. So like whatever ingredients need to be present in order to sort of like comprehensively and cohesively tell that story, that's what should be in a company's design system. So
cool. And so you were talking about how to maintain that system.
That's right. Yeah.
So you're already talking about, there's a design system already in place, maybe has been for years, or has been maybe even just last month, right?
Yep.
So how do developers and designers maintain that kind of system?
Yeah. So the reason why we're talking about maintenance is because I've now seen tons of companies bite down hard on this concept. It's not a very controversial sort of concept anymore. It's like the cat's out of the bag. I don't think like there's a lot of people out there that are like just now starting to learn like what they are at this stage in the game. It's like everybody's like either going through it or like in the process of doing it, or they've completed it. But the problem is, and I've sort of seen this with like a bunch of my clients, is that basically like I'll go in to consult with them, and they'll have like literally like a graveyard of design systems past or something, where it's like, oh yeah, here's what we did like last year. We'd like tried to make this work, and like here's what we did like 3 years ago to try to standardize everything. And so it's like it's hard work to get off the ground. But then like as soon as it gets launched, people are like, yeah, we did it, like we're done. And but that's of course not the end of the story. Like the real sort of value comes once you start shipping products, using the design system. So I like to say that the design system should be like a fine bottle of wine that like appreciates in value over time, rather than like a new car that like as soon as you drive it off the lot, it depreciates in value. It's like you don't want that. As soon as you launch it, that's like the beginning of the end, right? Like that's depressing.
Well, where does that challenge come from? Like if once you drive that off the lot, as we're saying, and we have designers and we have developers referencing that same system, where's the big disconnect? And how can we kind of circumvent that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and Una gave a great talk about sort of why design systems fail. So it's like we sort of like had these very sort of complementary talks. So it's like they fail for all sorts of reasons, and it's like, you know, a lot of times, increasingly now that the design system sort of cat is out of the bag, now that it's like a buzzword, people are like, oh, okay, we're gonna like make a design system as like as a sort of like deliberate effort. And on one hand, that's really great because it's like we need this sort of thing, and we're actually going to invest like real-time resources, money, people into it in order to make it happen. But the problem is that ultimately you don't want the design system. That's sort of like the wrong focus. The focus should be shipping better products faster. And the design system is sort of a means to an end, if you will. And so it's funny, it's like all sort of come full circle, because like the first 5.5 years of me sort of doing this, I helped create some software called Pattern Lab to help make this, make sort of more sort of systematic, reusable, component-driven sort of front-end experiences. And the first times we were doing it for clients like TechCrunch and Entertainment Weekly and Time Inc. and stuff. And we were like delivering, the gig wasn't to deliver a pattern library or a design system or create all of that. The gig was, we need a new responsive website. And so we're like, cool, well, we're going to build you a responsive website. And by way of doing that, we sort of created the software that allowed you to, you know, create and sort of visualize all the underlying components that built those responsive websites. So we deliver the project and we're like, here's your new website, TechCrunch or whatever. And they're like, cool. And then we're like, oh, by the way, we also delivered this like set of reusable components that you could sort of like grow and evolve over time. And they're like, yeah, like whatever, throw that in the trash. Yeah. But it's like, it's funny because it's come full circle now, all these years later, that now that people are focusing on this sort of like underlying components, people are like losing track of the fact that it's like those components only exist because they're building real, products or should be. But instead, what I'm seeing in a couple of like companies I've consulted with, it's like, they're like spinning up like, here's our button feature team and our card feature team and like our hero unit feature team, and we're using your atomic design methodology and oh yeah, we're like starting with the atoms, which means we're starting with like our headings, and we're starting with our buttons and our radio field and all of this, and then eventually we'll like build up to bigger sort of component. It's like it's all wrong. It's not about like starting with the components and focusing on the components. It's about sort of starting with, you know, what needs built, and then like sort of how do you, by way of building that thing, that whole product or that new feature or that new sort of property or whatever, how do you sort of extract the system from that work? And so like, I feel like that's one of the biggest things, and Jasenia Perez Cruz had a great talk about exactly that, where it's like, design systems have to be scenario driven. They have to solve real problems. Otherwise, it's just like sort of this design exercise that's like hanging off to the side. And it's like, even if there's like great stuff in it and there's like thoughtful documentation or whatever, if that doesn't reflect the reality of your design and development process, then like, it's just nothing but like wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking, yeah. Yeah, if it's not going to actually get used. And I think probably that's where we have a lot of that disconnect that we talk about, is that there's so many of these rules that we might set up, but maybe the dev team just doesn't find it realistic to be able to implement.
Yep, that's right. And that's like, it's one of those things where, again, people have their own definitions of what a design system is. And so you'll see these initiatives, some enterprising individuals, or it's like from one pocket of the organization, they'll say, oh, we're going to create a design system. And then they'll sort of like try to use it as like a bit of like a bludgeon or like just sort of shove it down people's throats. And it's like, that's not the way to like get people on board. Like, so one of the big things that we do in our process is like start out by doing research, which any good design project should start with. It's sort of like talking to people, the very people that will be affected by the design system. And
talk to your users?
Yeah, it's gross, right? But it's cool because it's like usually we think of users as like, you know, the people who are the end users of our software or whatever. And it's like, we'll talk to them for sure. But then with the design system, the real sort of users of the design system are the other designers and developers and product owners and QA people and like all those people who are building software for a company. And so it's like, we'll start off our process by basically like having them paint a picture of like what their process is like, what they're frustrated by, and then like also like how they would like to see, you know, what they would like to see out of a design system. It's like, let's say like we could create a design system, like what would you want that to address? You know, like basically what frustration do you have that you would like to no longer be frustrated by?
Yeah. How will I alleviate your pain?
Yeah. And in a very real way, it's like, we genuinely mean that. And because it's like what you hear. And then the other cool question we ask is basically like, what are you like most anxious about? Or like, what's the thing that's going to like kill this design system? Like, what's the thing that's just going to like sort of totally cause this thing to nosedive and cease to exist? And it's like, man, it's really cool to hear people spell out. It's like, oh, I just know that, you know, these dev teams are like not going to want to adopt it if it's like really hard to use, or like, I know that the designers are really precious about like this, or, you know, these product owners, they're so head down on their own roadmap. Like, we're not going to have that, you know. And it's cool because like you hear all of that and we're able to sort of like extract these sort of trends as you talk to like different people across the company. And that becomes that like sort of anxiety and that fear and the things that they're frustrated by. That's what you lean into as you create the design system. Is it's like, oh, okay, if the worry is that, you know, it's going to be too much effort for a dev team to sort of actually implement the design system, we just need to make that process be like lightning fast, you know, it like make it just sort of stupid easy for them to sort of get it into their code base. So it's like, that stuff is, I think, really important. And I think a lot of design systems like do not get, you know, take root and thrive because they haven't done that work of like figuring out like what people are actually frustrated by and what their actual pain points in their process and stuff are. And then like sort of tune the system that you're building to solve that stuff.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think I've never thought about that question. Like, what's going to suck about this, right? Like, tell me what you think is going to be terrible about this so that we can alleviate that problem. Like, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah. I think that's good for just like any project. It's just like, it's like, what's the thing that's going to make this like, just, either be really painful, or it's like, what does failure look like essentially is, you know, what it is. And it's like, and that I think really exposes a lot of the, you know, interpersonal dynamics, the like corporate bull crap, all of that, you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, sometimes, and as we found, it's like, sometimes you can really address that stuff. And then other times it's like, yeah, you're the DNA of your company. It's like, this culture is like, it's so whacked that it's like, no matter like any amount of effort or good intentions are going to sort of write that. But anyways, it's a great sort of, I feel, approach to sort of getting at the crux of what a system needs to do.
Yeah, have that actual discussion with design and development. It's not just some kind of precious thing that they create because they're looking to get, I don't know, buy-in from a C-level, and they're expecting a C-level to go, hey, developers, you're going to do this because the design team said so. Even if that happened, it's still doomed for failure.
Yeah, I think there's Josh Clark, who I have the good fortune of collaborating with a lot. He says it best. He says there's a lot of humility that needs to go into a design system project, because you're basically creating a product or tools for other people to use. And the system has to be in service of those other people. If you come at it from a point of like, we know best and we're like going to sort of shove it down your throats or whatever, and like we know what's best for you. Like you know, shut your mouth and just do what
do your job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like it's as nice as that sort of sounds from the from the position of power. It's like you really do have to come at it with like this sense of what are you trying to accomplish, and how can we, the people working on giving you these tools, how can we help empower you to do those things. So it's cool. It's like it definitely flips a lot of things on its head, I think, for sure. So because very often you'll see very senior people sort of helping craft these systems and stuff like that, but it's like you really do have to come at it from this point of like, all right, it's not about what I want as an individual, but it's about sort of recognizing, here's the reality of our landscape, here's how teams are working, here's what things they're doing, and how do we sort of thoughtfully create tools to like help them do their jobs better.
Exactly.
How do, in your opinion, who do you think should own the design system? Who do you think is not only, to use the racy term, right? Like who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be informed about this design system, and how consistently does it need to be looked at? Yeah,
well, so to quickly answer the last part of the question is like it is a product, right? So it's like it's a product like any other, so it has its own roadmap and needs to like be constantly improved, especially it's like as it gets connected to more and more other products that are relying on it as like a dependency. It's like it's not just something you could like set it and forget it and then like that's it, right? Tools in your basement will get rusty if you don't use them, so it's you need to do the hard maintenance work of like keeping everything sort of keeping the knife sharp, I guess. But as far as like sort of who's responsible for and who's like accountable, like all of that is a fantastic question. And like there's a bunch of different models out there. Both Nathan Curtis and Gina Ann have talked about different models for sort of a design system team. So it's like you can have people who sort of, there's a centralized model, which is like you have a product team that is like the design system team. And that's essentially just another product team, right? So they have their own UX designers, visual designers, front end people, maybe, product owner, maybe some like QA people or back end people even. But they're essentially like a unit, and their product isn't necessarily like the homepage of the marketing website or whatever. Their product is the design system that in turn helps build that homepage. So that's one model, but and that has a pro of you have dedicated resources to like keeping these knives sharp and making sure that everything is like sort of up to snuff. But the challenge is, one of the things that I talked about in my talk is that the design system needs to have two perspectives equally represented in it. One is like this sort of bird's eye view perspective. So a centralized design system team is able to sort of like be sort of flying over all the different product silos, all the different sort of, business units and whatever, and sort of seeing what software is being produced and help craft a system that can sort of scale and work in all of those different silos. It's a really important sort of perspective to have. But then equally important is that sort of on the ground, in the weeds perspective, like an individual designer on an individual product trying to solve very specific problems for a very specific like use case and audience and all that stuff. So it's like with that centralized team, they're working on a system, but that sort of runs the risk of losing that on the ground in the weeds perspective, because it's like, it could almost end up being like an ivory tower kind of situation where it's like, oh, these people are over here creating this sort of like, best case scenario sort of system. But again, if that's not actually solving real product teams' problems, then it's sort of,
what's the point?
Right, exactly. And then so there's another model, which is a federated model, which means you have a design system, but that's managed by team members that are sort of dedicated to individual product work. So it's like, you might be working on the marketing site, and you might be working on like the logged in app experience or whatever. And it's like, you might be, the front end developer for the design system as well. Like, so you're like sort of crafting that, and you're sort of like the visual designer on that. So it's like, you're sort of both working on your respective products, but are also sort of trying to contribute to the shared system.
Right.
problem with that is that you lose that bird's eye view perspective, right? Because now you're like, oh, I need the system to do this. And you're like, I need the system to do this. And it's like, those can be competing. So you're not able to sort of look into those other silos when the federated team is like sort of head down doing their work. So there's sort of, Gina wrote a great post. She was at Salesforce for a while, and she talked about how their team structure was sort of a combination of the two. She called it like the cyclical model, where it's basically like you have a centralized design system team, which is great because you get that, centralized roadmap and that dedicated effort and all that. But then you also have federated team members that are also contributing to the design system as well. And then crucially, they sort of like pair up,
right,
and sort of like make sure that individual product team members are contributing to the system and understand the importance of the system as they do their work. And also the team at Etsy, they do sort of like design system team rotations and stuff. So like individual designers and developers will sort of like for a couple weeks at a time will like be a part of the design system team and then sort of rotate back out. And all of that sort of helps get them more systems minded, but then they're also able to bring with them their sort of in the weeds experience to the system. Right. So it's like this cool, nice, virtuous cycle between the real products that are being built and the system that powers them.
It's cool because then like your developers and your designers that are outside of that product team initially can almost like QA what's going on and test it even, right? Like, I can't copy this, bit of code because it's broken here. So maybe did this change like somewhere in the actual system and so on and so forth. So that's pretty awesome. I think that's a really great idea.
It's hard work. And, like one of the themes over the last couple of days, both Justenia, Una, and myself have all been talking about design systems and also talking about just like, holy smokes, this is just all about managing people and that it's like the tech and it's like, are you using React or Vue or Twig or who cares? It's like that's not to say it doesn't matter. And it's like, but that's like the thing I think a lot of teams like to geek out about because it's like you can sort of get your hand around it whenever you're like, hey, this is more about sort of like managing people and they're like weird psychology and like power dynamics and stuff. They're like, I don't want to go there. I'm a designer. I'm a developer. Like, I don't want to touch that stuff. So I think it does. It takes like sort of like a special kind of person who's like able to like sort of wade through the organizational muck to like.
Yeah, somebody needs to own that and have those conversations for it to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
So you would say for sure that being a culture, like kind of diving into the culture of a company is just as important to the design system as the design system itself.
I would say, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can, create in a vacuum. I mean, the three of us probably right now could create a great design system that looks great and has really clean code and like all of that stuff. But like, and then you could go in after the fact and be like, hey, we got a design system. How about we plug it in at your company? And it's like, there's a very good chance it's going to fail. So it has everything to do with, like sort of mapping the system's output, right? The actual like tangible Lego bricks and all the documentation, all that stuff to the real lived experience and problems and frustrations and all of that like real people at the organization are sort of living through. It's, and it's cool because it's, you're trying to create tools, you're empathizing with them and you're trying to create tools to alleviate their frustration. And it's like, that's, I feel like a sane way and we'll say like a compassionate way of building design systems rather than it's like, again, you don't know what's good for yourself and we're just going to sort of like throw some solutions at you. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for spending some time with us. Really appreciate
thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great, and I think we got a lot of good ideas about design systems.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Have fun. Go to Disney with your fams.
Yeah. Hope the weather holds up. So
Oh my God. Yeah, that hurricane. Yeah, I think we'll be all right. Stay tuned, everybody. We got a lot more coming up.
Bye.
Thanks.